Marcus Williams pulled his thin jacket tighter around his shoulders as the December wind cut through the empty downtown streets. The snow had been falling for 3 hours straight, turning the sidewalks into slippery death traps. At 62 years old, Marcus knew he should have been home by now. But home was just a cold studio apartment with a broken heater and an eviction notice taped to the door. The construction company had laid him off 6 months ago when the housing market crashed. His unemployment benefits had run out weeks before Thanksgiving, and his savings account showed a balance of $12.37. The food bank was closed until Monday, and his stomach hadn't seen a proper meal in 2 days. Marcus had spent the afternoon walking from business to business, asking if anyone needed help with snow removal or odd jobs. Most places turned him away before he could finish his sentence. His worn-out work boots had holes that let the freezing slush seep through to his socks, and his fingers had gone numb despite the thin gloves he wore. The library had been his refuge for most of the day, but they closed at 6 o'clock on Saturdays. Now he faced the reality of another night walking the streets or trying to find shelter in a doorway somewhere. The homeless shelter downtown had been full for weeks, with a waiting list longer than a phone book. As Marcus trudged down Fifth Avenue, past the warm glow of restaurant windows and shops preparing to close, he felt the familiar weight of despair settling on his chest. He had always been a proud man who worked hard and paid his bills on time. Never in his wildest dreams had he imagined he would be in this situation, wondering where his next meal would come from. The snow was getting heavier now, and visibility was dropping fast. Marcus could barely make out the street signs through the swirling white curtain. His legs felt like lead weights, and each step required more effort than the last. The cold was seeping deep into his bones, making his joints ache and his muscles cramp. He passed a group of young people heading into a warm coffee shop, their laughter echoing off the empty street. They looked so carefree and happy, completely unaware of the invisible man shuffling past them in the snow. Marcus remembered when he used to be like that, back when he had a steady paycheck and a future that looked bright. The wind picked up again, sending a fresh wave of snow directly into his face. Marcus stumbled slightly, catching himself against a lamppost. His breathing was becoming labored, and he could see his breath forming small clouds in the frigid air. He knew he needed to find shelter soon, but every option seemed closed off to him. As he continued walking, Marcus thought about his daughter Sarah, who lived 3 states away with her own family. He hadn't told her about his situation because he didn't want to burden her with his problems. She had her own mortgage and kids to worry about. The last thing she needed was a phone call from her father asking for help. The streetlights were coming on now, casting long shadows across the snow-covered pavement. Marcus realized he had been walking for over an hour since leaving the library, and he still had no idea where he would spend the night. His feet were completely numb, and he could no longer feel his toes inside his soaked boots. The intersection of 5th and Morrison was particularly treacherous, with ice forming under the fresh snow. Marcus stepped carefully, but his worn boot sole had no traction left. His foot slipped sideways, and he felt his balance shift. Time seemed to slow down as he windmilled his arms, trying desperately to stay upright. The fall happened fast but felt endless. Marcus hit the icy pavement hard, his hip taking the brunt of the impact. A sharp pain shot up his side, and he let out a grunt that was quickly swallowed by the howling wind. He lay there for a moment, stunned and disoriented, watching the snowflakes land on his face and melt instantly. When Marcus tried to get up, his left leg wouldn't cooperate. The pain in his hip was intense, radiating down through his thigh and up into his lower back. He managed to roll onto his side and attempted to push himself up with his hands, but the slippery surface offered no grip. Each movement sent waves of agony through his body. The street was completely empty now. The few cars that had been brave enough to venture out earlier had found safer places to wait out the storm. The shops were all closed, their windows dark except for the occasional security light. Marcus realized with growing panic that he was truly alone, injured, and rapidly losing body heat to the unforgiving cold. He tried calling for help, but his voice was weak, and the wind carried it away before it could travel more than a few feet. The snow continued to accumulate around him, and he could feel the dampness seeping through his clothes. His body began to shiver uncontrollably as hypothermia started to set in. Marcus thought about his life as he lay there helpless. He remembered his wedding day to Helen, how beautiful she had looked in her simple white dress. They had been married for 38 years before cancer took her away 3 years ago. Since then, everything in his life had slowly unraveled. First, his health started declining. Then the medical bills from Helen's treatment drained their savings. And finally, the economic downturn cost him his job. The shivering was getting worse now, and Marcus could feel his thinking becoming fuzzy. He knew from his years working construction in harsh weather that this was a dangerous sign. His core body temperature was dropping, and his body was starting to shut down non-essential functions to preserve heat for his vital organs. 20 minutes passed, though it felt like hours to Marcus. The snow had covered most of his body now, and passers-by would have trouble seeing him even if there had been any. His fingers and toes had gone completely numb, and the pain in his hip was becoming a dull, distant ache as his nervous system began to shut down. Just when Marcus was beginning to accept that this might be how his story ended, he heard the sound of footsteps crunching through the snow. At first he thought it might be his imagination playing tricks on him, but the sound grew louder and more distinct. Someone was walking down the street, moving slowly and carefully through the storm. Marcus tried to call out again, but his voice was barely a whisper now. He used every ounce of strength he had left to move his arm, creating a small disturbance in the snow that had accumulated on top of him. The footsteps paused, and Marcus held his breath, praying that whoever it was would notice him. The stranger stopped walking completely now, and Marcus could hear them moving closer. A voice called out, muffled by the wind but clearly concerned. Marcus felt a wave of relief wash over him as he realized someone had finally found him. He wasn't going to die alone in the snow after all. Elena Rodriguez had been working the night shift at the downtown medical clinic for 3 years, but she had never seen a storm this fierce. The clinic had closed early due to the weather, sending all non-emergency patients home and telling staff to leave as soon as possible. Elena lived only 8 blocks away, so she decided to walk rather than wait for a bus that might never come. As a nurse practitioner, Elena had seen her share of emergencies, but nothing had prepared her for what she discovered at the intersection. At first she thought it was just a pile of snow and debris blown together by the wind, but something about the shape didn't look right, and her medical training had taught her to investigate anything unusual. When she got closer, Elena could see a human hand barely visible beneath the snow. Her heart rate immediately spiked as her professional instincts kicked in. She quickly brushed away the snow and found Marcus unconscious and barely breathing. His lips were blue, his skin was pale and cold to the touch, and his pulse was weak and irregular. Elena knew she was looking at a severe case of hypothermia, possibly complicated by injuries from a fall. She immediately called 911 on her cell phone, but the dispatcher told her that ambulances were not running due to the storm conditions. The streets were too dangerous, and even emergency vehicles were getting stuck. She was on her own until the weather cleared. Without hesitation, Elena made a decision that would change both their lives forever. She couldn't move Marcus by herself, especially if he had internal injuries, but she couldn't leave him in the snow either. She spotted a 24-hour convenience store about half a block away, its neon sign barely visible through the blizzard. Elena ran to the store and explained the situation to the clerk, a young man named David who looked terrified by the storm. Together they gathered every blanket, towel, and warm item they could find in the store. David grabbed a small space heater from the storage room while Elena collected first aid supplies. The two of them carefully made their way back to Marcus, who was now completely unconscious. Elena checked his vital signs again and found them weaker than before. They were running out of time. Working together, Elena and David managed to create a makeshift shelter using a shopping cart, blankets, and a piece of cardboard to block the wind. Elena began the delicate process of warming Marcus slowly to prevent shock. She knew from her medical training that rewarming a hypothermia victim too quickly could cause dangerous heart rhythms or even cardiac arrest. She placed warm towels on his core body areas while David set up the space heater at a safe distance. For the next 2 hours, Elena monitored Marcus around the clock, checking his pulse, breathing, and core temperature every few minutes. David brought hot coffee and soup from the store's warming station, and Elena used the warm liquids to help raise Marcus's body temperature gradually. Around midnight, Marcus began to stir. His eyes fluttered open and he looked around in confusion, not sure where he was or what had happened. Elena leaned down and spoke to him in a calm, reassuring voice, explaining that he had been found unconscious in the snow and that she was a nurse taking care of him. Marcus tried to sit up, but Elena gently pushed him back down, explaining that he needed to stay warm and still until his body temperature returned to normal. She asked him about his injuries, and Marcus told her about the pain in his hip and his inability to walk. Elena suspected he might have a fracture, but there was no way to get him to a hospital until the storm passed. As the hours passed, Elena learned Marcus's story. She listened as he told her about losing his job, his wife's death, and his current homeless situation. She could see the shame and embarrassment in his eyes as he explained how he had ended up collapsed in the snow. Elena felt her heart breaking for this proud man who had simply run out of options. When dawn finally broke and the snow stopped falling, Elena made another life-changing decision. Instead of waiting for an ambulance, she convinced David to help her get Marcus into her car. She was going to take him to the hospital herself, and she was already planning what would happen after that. Elena Rodriguez had been working the night shift at the downtown medical clinic for 3 years, but she had never seen a storm this fierce. The clinic had closed early due to the weather, sending all non-emergency patients home and telling staff to leave as soon as possible. Elena lived only 8 blocks away, so she decided to walk rather than wait for a bus that might never come. As a nurse practitioner, Elena had seen her share of emergencies, but nothing had prepared her for what she discovered at the intersection. At first, she thought it was just a pile of snow and debris blown together by the wind, but something about the shape didn't look right, and her medical training had taught her to investigate anything unusual. When she got closer, Elena could see a human hand barely visible beneath the snow. Her heart rate immediately spiked as her professional instincts kicked in. She quickly brushed away the snow and found Marcus unconscious and barely breathing. His lips were blue, his skin was pale and cold to the touch, and his pulse was weak and irregular. Elena knew she was looking at a severe case of hypothermia, possibly complicated by injuries from a fall. She immediately called 911 on her cell phone, but the dispatcher told her that ambulances were not running due to the storm conditions. The streets were too dangerous, and even emergency vehicles were getting stuck. She was on her own until the weather cleared. Without hesitation, Elena made a decision that would change both their lives forever. She couldn't move Marcus by herself, especially if he had internal injuries, but she couldn't leave him in the snow either. She spotted a 24-hour convenience store about half a block away, its neon sign barely visible through the blizzard. Elena ran to the store and explained the situation to the clerk, a young man named David who looked terrified by the storm. Together, they gathered every blanket, towel, and warm item they could find in the store. David grabbed a small space heater from the storage room while Elena collected first aid supplies. The two of them carefully made their way back to Marcus, who was now completely unconscious. Elena checked his vital signs again and found them weaker than before. They were running out of time. Working together, Elena and David managed to create a makeshift shelter using a shopping cart, blankets, and a piece of cardboard to block the wind. Elena began the delicate process of warming Marcus slowly to prevent shock. She knew from her medical training that rewarming a hypothermia victim too quickly could cause dangerous heart rhythms or even cardiac arrest. She placed warm towels on his core body areas while David set up the space heater at a safe distance. For the next 2 hours, Elena monitored Marcus around the clock, checking his pulse, breathing, and core temperature every few minutes. David brought hot coffee and soup from the store's warming station, and Elena used the warm liquids to help raise Marcus's body temperature gradually. Around midnight, Marcus began to stir. His eyes fluttered open and he looked around in confusion, not sure where he was or what had happened. Elena leaned down and spoke to him in a calm, reassuring voice, explaining that he had been found unconscious in the snow and that she was a nurse taking care of him. Marcus tried to sit up, but Elena gently pushed him back down, explaining that he needed to stay warm and still until his body temperature returned to normal. She asked him about his injuries, and Marcus told her about the pain in his hip and his inability to walk. Elena suspected he might have a fracture, but there was no way to get him to a hospital until the storm passed. As the hours passed, Elena learned Marcus's story. She listened as he told her about losing his job, his wife's death, and his current homeless situation. She could see the shame and embarrassment in his eyes as he explained how he had ended up collapsed in the snow. Elena felt her heart breaking for this proud man who had simply run out of options. When dawn finally broke and the snow stopped falling, Elena made another life-changing decision. Instead of waiting for an ambulance, she convinced David to help her get Marcus into her car. She was going to take him to the hospital herself, and she was already planning what would happen after that. 3 weeks into his stay at the transitional housing facility, Marcus had established a routine that gave structure to his days. Every morning he attended physical therapy sessions to strengthen his hip and improve his mobility. The therapist, a cheerful woman named Janet, worked with him on exercises that would prepare him for the physical demands of construction work. Elena continued to visit Marcus twice a week, usually bringing dinner from her favorite Mexican restaurant or homemade soup that reminded him of the meals his wife used to make. During these visits, they talked about everything from their childhoods to their dreams for the future. Marcus learned that Elena had become a nurse after watching her grandmother struggle with diabetes, and that she lived alone with 2 rescue cats named Charlie and Luna. The friendship that developed between them surprised both of them. Despite their different backgrounds and the 20-year age gap, they found they had similar values and a shared sense of humor. Elena appreciated Marcus's wisdom and life experience, while Marcus was inspired by Elena's compassion and energy. They began to genuinely look forward to their time together. Roberto Martinez, the construction company owner, came to visit Marcus at the facility to discuss the job opportunity. Roberto was a soft-spoken man in his 50s who had built his business from nothing after immigrating from Colombia 20 years earlier. He explained that his company specialized in renovating hospitals and medical offices, which required workers who understood the importance of cleanliness and attention to detail. The job would start with light duties that wouldn't stress Marcus's recovering hip, such as painting, basic electrical work, and assisting other crew members. As Marcus's strength improved, he could take on more challenging tasks. The pay was fair, and the company offered health insurance after a 90-day probationary period. Most importantly, Roberto made it clear that he was looking for long-term employees, not temporary help. Marcus's caseworker, Mrs. Thompson, was impressed with his progress. He had followed all the facility rules, attended every required meeting, and maintained a positive attitude despite the challenges he faced. She helped him apply for food stamps and Medicaid to supplement his limited income, and she connected him with a financial counselor who could help him eventually rebuild his credit. One evening, Elena arrived at the facility with unexpected news. Her church had heard about Marcus's story through their community outreach program, and they wanted to help in a more substantial way. The congregation had taken up a special collection and raised enough money to help Marcus with his first month's rent when he was ready to move into his own apartment. Marcus was overwhelmed by the generosity of people he had never met. Elena explained that her church believed strongly in helping those in need, regardless of their religious beliefs or background. The pastor had said that Marcus's story was a reminder that any of them could face difficult circumstances, and that supporting each other was fundamental to being human. As winter slowly gave way to spring, Marcus began working for Roberto's company on a part-time basis. His first project was helping to renovate a pediatric clinic, and he found the work satisfying in a way that his previous construction jobs had never been. Knowing that his efforts would help create a better environment for sick children gave his work deeper meaning. Marcus's co-workers were welcoming and respectful, treating him as a valued team member rather than charity case. Many of them had their own stories of overcoming adversity, and they appreciated Roberto's philosophy of giving people second chances. The physical work was challenging for Marcus's recovering body, but it felt good to be productive and useful again. Elena watched Marcus's transformation with deep satisfaction. The defeated, hopeless man she had found in the snow was gradually being replaced by someone who stood straighter, smiled more often, and talked about future plans. His self-confidence was returning along with his physical strength, and he was beginning to believe that his best days might still be ahead of him. One Saturday afternoon, Elena and Marcus were sitting in the facility's garden when he brought up a subject that had been on his mind for weeks. He wanted to find a way to help other people who were facing homelessness, particularly older adults who might not know about available resources. Elena listened as Marcus outlined his ideas for volunteering at the shelter, or maybe speaking to groups about his experience. Elena was excited by Marcus's desire to give back, but she wasn't surprised by it. She had seen his character during their first meeting in the snow, and she knew that his difficult experience hadn't made him bitter or selfish. Instead, it had deepened his empathy for others who were struggling. She offered to help him research volunteer opportunities and connect with organizations that might benefit from his perspective. 6 months after that fateful night in the snow, Marcus signed the lease for his own one-bedroom apartment. It wasn't fancy, but it had reliable heat, a small kitchen, and windows that let in plenty of natural light. Elena helped him shop for basic furniture and household items, many of which came from thrift stores and garage sales. Marcus didn't mind the second-hand furniture. He was just grateful to have a place to call home again. The apartment was only 3 blocks from Elena's house, which made their friendship even easier to maintain. She often stopped by after work to share dinner or watch old movies on the small television that Marcus had bought with his first full paycheck. These quiet evenings became precious to both of them, offering Elena a peaceful break from her demanding job and giving Marcus the companionship he had missed since his wife's death. Marcus had been promoted to full-time status at Roberto's construction company after proving himself to be reliable, skilled, and easy to work with. His hip had healed completely, and the physical therapy had actually left him stronger than he had been before the accident. Roberto had begun assigning him more complex projects and had hinted that a supervisor position might be available in the coming year. Elena's life had also changed in unexpected ways. Helping Marcus had reminded her of why she had chosen nursing as a career, and she had become more involved in community health outreach programs. She started volunteering at a free clinic on weekends, providing basic medical care to people who couldn't afford to see a doctor. Many of her patients were homeless or underemployed, and she found their stories both heartbreaking and inspiring. One evening, Marcus surprised Elena with an invitation to dinner at a real restaurant, not the casual places they usually went to. He wanted to properly thank her for everything she had done, and he had saved up enough money to take her somewhere special. Elena was touched by the gesture, but she insisted that his friendship and recovery were thanks enough. Over dinner, Marcus told Elena about a conversation he had with his daughter Sarah the week before. He had finally called her and explained everything that had happened over the past year. Sarah was shocked to learn about her father's struggles, but she was also amazed by his recovery and the role that Elena had played in saving his life. She wanted to fly out to meet Elena and thank her in person. Elena was nervous about meeting Sarah, worried that Marcus's daughter might resent her involvement in her father's life. But when Sarah arrived the following month, Elena quickly realized that her fears were unfounded. Sarah was grateful beyond words for Elena's kindness and credited her with giving her father back to her. The 3 of them spent a wonderful weekend together, and Sarah invited Elena to visit her family anytime. Marcus had also followed through on his desire to help other homeless individuals. He started volunteering at the downtown shelter 2 evenings a week, helping with meal service and talking with residents about available resources. His personal experience gave him credibility that social workers sometimes lacked, and many people found it easier to accept help and advice from someone who had been in their shoes. The shelter director was so impressed with Marcus's volunteer work that she offered him a part-time, paid position as a peer counselor. It would mean working evenings and weekends in addition to his construction job. But Marcus was excited about the opportunity to make his volunteer efforts more official. Elena supported his decision, knowing how much fulfillment he found in helping others. Marcus's story began to attract attention from local media when the shelter director nominated him for a community service award. A newspaper reporter interviewed him about his experience with homelessness and recovery, and Elena was featured prominently in the article as the stranger who had saved his life. The story touched many readers and generated donations for both the shelter and the Veterans Housing Program. Speaking engagements followed the newspaper article, with Marcus sharing his story at churches, community groups, and business organizations. He was a natural speaker, combining humor with hard truths about the reality of homelessness in their city. Elena often attended these presentations, proud to see Marcus using his experience to educate others and advocate for better support systems. The bond between Marcus and Elena had evolved into something deeper than either of them had expected. They weren't romantic partners, but their connection was profound and unshakable. They had become family to each other, providing support, companionship, and unconditional acceptance. Elena often introduced Marcus as her dearest friend, while Marcus referred to Elena as his guardian angel. As the anniversary of their first meeting approached, both Marcus and Elena reflected on how much their lives had changed. What had started as a medical emergency had blossomed into a friendship that had transformed both of them. Elena had rediscovered her passion for helping others, while Marcus had rebuilt his life and found new purpose in serving his community. 2 years after Elena found Marcus collapsed in the snow, their lives had stabilized into a new normal that neither could have imagined during that terrifying winter night. Marcus had been promoted to crew supervisor at Roberto's construction company and was training new employees, many of whom were former homeless individuals or people facing similar challenges. His apartment had become a comfortable home filled with photos, books, and small mementos that told the story of his recovery. Elena had been offered a promotion to head nurse at the downtown clinic, recognition for her excellent patient care and community involvement. She had also started dating a fellow nurse named Michael, whom she had met at the free clinic where they both volunteered. Marcus liked Michael immediately and appreciated how he supported Elena's passion for helping others. The three of them often had dinner together, and Marcus enjoyed having more friends in his expanding social circle. The annual anniversary of their meeting had become a tradition for Marcus and Elena. Every December, on the date when she found him in the snow, they would have dinner at the Mexican restaurant where Elena first brought him food in the hospital. It was their way of celebrating not just Marcus's survival, but the friendship that had grown from that moment of crisis. This year's anniversary dinner was particularly special because Marcus had big news to share. The shelter where he volunteered had received a large grant to expand their services, and they had offered Marcus a full-time position as the program coordinator for their new job training initiative. It would mean leaving construction work, but Marcus was excited about the opportunity to help homeless individuals develop job skills and find employment. Elena was thrilled about Marcus's new opportunity, knowing how much satisfaction he found in helping others rebuild their lives. She had watched him counsel dozens of shelter residents over the past 2 years, and she had seen how his genuine empathy and personal experience made him uniquely effective at reaching people who had given up hope. The job training program would teach basic skills like food service, custodial work, and light construction to homeless individuals who were ready to work but lacked experience or confidence. Marcus would oversee the program, working with local businesses to provide internships and job placements. It was exactly the kind of work that combined his practical skills with his desire to make a difference in people's lives. Marcus had also been working on a project that would surprise Elena, with help from the local newspaper reporter who had first written about his story. He was writing a book about his experience with homelessness and recovery. The book would include practical advice for people facing similar challenges, as well as guidance for those who wanted to help but didn't know how. When Marcus told Elena about the book project over their anniversary dinner, she was amazed and proud. The man who had been so ashamed of his circumstances 2 years earlier was now willing to share his story publicly to help others. The book would include a chapter about Elena's role in his recovery, which she found both touching and slightly embarrassing. Elena had her own announcement to make during their dinner. She and Michael were engaged to be married, and she wanted Marcus to walk her down the aisle at their wedding. Elena's father had died when she was young, and Marcus had become the closest thing to a father figure in her adult life. Marcus was honored by the request and immediately accepted. As they sat in the familiar restaurant, surrounded by the warm yellow light and the gentle sounds of other diners enjoying their meals, both Marcus and Elena marveled at the journey they had taken together. What had begun as a chance encounter in a snowstorm had become the foundation for a friendship that had changed both their lives in fundamental ways. Marcus often thought about what would have happened if Elena had chosen a different route home that night, or if she had dismissed the strange shape in the snow as just debris. He knew he would not have survived, and his daughter Sarah would have eventually received a phone call that every child dreads. Instead, a stranger's compassion had given him a second chance at life. Elena frequently reflected on how helping Marcus had rekindled her passion for nursing and community service. Before that night, she had been going through the motions at work, burned out from the endless stream of sick and suffering people who passed through the clinic. Marcus had reminded her that behind every patient was a human being, with a story, dreams, and the potential for recovery. The ripple effects of their friendship continued to spread throughout their community. The Veterans Housing Program had expanded to serve twice as many people, partly due to increased donations inspired by Marcus's story. Elena's church had started a winter outreach program that provided warm clothing and hot meals to homeless individuals during the coldest months of the year as they finished their meal and prepared to leave the restaurant. Marcus and Elena made plans for the coming year. Marcus would start his new job in January, and Elena's wedding was planned for the spring. They had also discussed taking a vacation together, possibly visiting Sarah and her family, or taking a trip to the mountains that Marcus had always wanted to see. Walking out into the December night, neither of them could have predicted that their chance meeting would lead to such profound changes in their lives. Marcus was no longer the broken man who had collapsed in the snow, and Elena had discovered depths of compassion and purpose she hadn't known she possessed. Together, they had proven that sometimes the most meaningful relationships begin with one person simply refusing to walk past another person in need.